So I've been thinking a lot lately about the coronavirus situation and what the next few months might look like. Obviously, what the last couple months looked like and what it might look like the next few months. Particularly a topic that's relevant to me is the whole kids going back to school, having a son, and there's a lot of talk right now about maybe they won't go back to school, maybe they'll go back in shifts, trying to figure out what's even feasible and possible. And so obviously being very kind of engaged and plugged into that, I'm thinking a lot about these decisions that have to be made. How will they decide what they do with the kids in school? How will they decide what they do with public transportation or parks or whatever it is? And as I start thinking about that, I come right pretty quickly to well, who's the they? Who's deciding? With the full understanding that it's pretty complex, the way the government works, and there's obviously federal guidance and there's state guidance, and then the local, cities, towns, counties, whatever it might be, have their authority. So there's layers to it, and in theory, the guidance is really coming from medical professionals, healthcare professionals, etc., on what they think is best, and I'm okay with that. That's kind of the way our government works and the way our country works. That's who should ultimately be making decisions. But it started to make me think about what role do we play, we the people, in these decisions that are being made. We're not a true democracy in the sense that the people vote on everything, right? That's not in most cases how we function it. So again, understanding that, what should we do? What should we play in this? And what it made me start to think of is the burden of proof, if you will, is really on the government, the public officials, the scientists, the medical professionals that are making these decisions, right? The burden of proof is for them, or should be for them, to be convincing us that all these actions, all these potential policies are necessary, right? Particularly when they start to infringe upon our freedoms and some of our liberties, it becomes critical that burden of proof is provided. They're making decisions around these things, knowingly, willingly, to take away some of our freedoms and liberties, which may be okay. That might be the right thing to do. In no part of this, point that I'm making in this video is it meant to say this is ridiculous. We're being oppressed unfairly and unjustly and for no reason, or trying to say the coronavirus sake. I'm not passing judgment or value judgment on that in either way, if it's right, wrong, or indifferent. What I'm saying is, even if it is right, even if it is wrong, that if that's going to be done, if that decision is going to be made, they have to show their work, and they have to show it in detail, right? By that I mean like a math test you would take in high school, where the answer is just not enough. You got to show me your work. Because, what it makes me start to think of is a couple things. We as a country, we as America, to the extent we think of ourselves as an entity, one of the things that I think fits into that, where there's genuinely like a viewpoint or a feeling as a country that we have throughout the generations, is how important our freedom and our liberties are. And, a couple examples that illustrate that are, one, you think about somebody who's on trial for murder. Somebody who, hypothetical situation, right? Who you're almost certain, everybody's almost certain, committed this murder. But for some reason, a legal, not a technicality, but perhaps something was mishandled by the prosecution in some ways that it might have suggested that their liberties were infringed upon as part of this process. Therefore, they can't get a fair trial, right? And there's that piece of it. We as a country, we're not happy about those situations, but we've accepted that if that were to happen, that person goes free. Because as horrible as it is to murder someone, and if we are almost certain that person did it, if we can't prove it within the system that we've set up, which is meant to be what's fair and provides freedoms and liberties, that person goes free. And furthermore, thinking about how do you prove that person did it? The burden of proof sits with the prosecution, with the government in effect, and they have to convince a jury of that defendant's peers, right? If it's a murder case, it's not a jury of homicide detectives. It's not a jury of blood experts or splatter experts, if it was a stab scene or whatever it might be. It's a random jury of your peers. That's who needs to be convinced that A, the process was fair, and B, when we put this person in a cell and take away their liberties maybe for life, it was warranted, right? So you see how high the threshold is for us as Americans to say how important freedom is to us. And if you're going to take it away, you have to check a lot of boxes. The burden of proof, the threshold is very high. You could apply a similar way of thinking to, war, when we go to war. Again, don't worry about, regardless of the reason why we go to war, but let's think about American Revolution, Civil War, World War II, wars where it's pretty objectively believed now it was the right thing for us to do to enter those wars. We send people willingly as a country, we have, and people go willingly, knowing there's a great chance they're gonna die. Because we believe in the cause. We believe in protecting our freedoms from enemies outside of us, internal, whatever it might be. It is that important that we as a country keep an army, standing army, and send people to go fight if we feel our freedoms are threatened. Now, again, I'm not trying to get into a political aspect of when it's right to go to war and when it's not. Let's leave that aside for now. That's a good discussion to have, but not for this one. The point is, throughout our history, that's something that's happened. So again, it just illustrates the extremely high threshold we have for giving up freedoms. We are willing to give up a lot before we'll give up our freedoms and our liberties. And I think this situation should be no different. It does, just like in the murder trial, just like in the war, there may be situations where we have to make that sacrifice. We have to sacrifice our freedoms in some way. That may be true, and it may be true right now with this coronavirus situation, that all the policies they're talking about are needed because it's a mass casualty situation otherwise. Let's assume that's true. We still should be demanding an unbelievably high threshold and the burden of proof being unbelievably high for those that are making those decisions to convince us of that. It should not be something where we are not totally sure why, or they don't have to show us their thinking or their work in a great level of depth. Not just trust us, not here's some data that you can look at a certain way. They should be thinking, they should be saying to us, this is the absolute last thing we want to do, but here is why it's unbelievably critical that we do it. They should be convincing us of that this ultimate sacrifice for us as Americans, which really is for us, our freedoms, that it needs to be done. So I am fully on board if that burden of proof is met, if that threshold is crossed. But we all should be asking the question, no matter where we sit politically, no matter where we sit on how dangerous the virus is, we should all be asking the question, have you proven it to us? Because it has to be. That's how we do it here in America, that the burden has to be that high.